So, all right, you guys, we are starting on the page that says Antonio Vivaldi in bold at the top and has the picture of him weirdly holding a violin or a viola, not really looking like he's going to play it, like he's just posing with it. And there's something really interesting about him that we will find out, and maybe you already know it from our last little bit that we learned, but that white hair mop on his head, that's not his hair. In fact, during the Baroque period, very often wigs were worn. You just didn't show your actual hair, and men wore fancier, as fancy wigs as women did. That was just the style of it. So his actual hair was significantly different than what you see in that picture. But let's go ahead and start together at the top of the page there. It says that he was born on March 4th, 1678 in Venice, Italy. And he died on July 28th, 1741 in Vienna, Austria. And so that puts him just squarely in the middle of the Baroque period, since, as we know, it lasted from the year 1600 to 1750. And now I'll start up at the top where there's the block of text. He was a composer of the Baroque era. He learned the craft of music from his father, who was a violinist in the church orchestra in Venice, Italy, my bad. Young Antonio served in church orchestras and eventually studied for the priesthood. He was ordained as a priest in 1703 at the age of 25, but he never served the church in a religious capacity. However, he remained active in music and served the church as a musician. Okay, here's a little footnote for you, and I'll try for it not to be too, inappropriate. People who were priests of the Catholic Church were not supposed to get married. They were not supposed to have any romantic interests whatsoever. But from what I have heard and what I have read about him, there was one girl, and she was a soloist, and he loved to write music for her, and they tended to go places together, and there was a lot of chit-chat, you know how it is in churches or any organizations, about this girl who was always with him. And it sounds to me like they maybe wouldn't allow him to serve as like a priestly priest because they thought that maybe he was having some sort of relationship with this girl where they were not allowed to do any of that kind of stuff. I don't know if that was true or if that was just church chit chat, but there you go. Vivaldi began composing sonatas for keyboard instruments around 1705. He also played the violin in opera orchestras, and he developed a love of opera and composed several operas. And this was unusual and controversial. Priests were not supposed to compose music for non-church related activities. His first opera was performed in the year 1713 when he was 35 years old. From the year 1709 to 1714, Vivaldi had the financial backing of an Italian prince in the city of Mantua, and he continued composing operas in addition to keyboard, choral, and orchestral works. When the prince ended his support, Vivaldi accepted a position as an orchestral conductor at St. Mark's Cathedral in Venice, Italy, the same church and orchestra which his father had played violin. He held this position for 27 years, and he also served as the director of a musical conservatory in Venice. By 1719, when he was 41 years old, another wealthy patron had begun to provide financial support for Vivaldi, and for the next several years, he composed operas for opera companies throughout Italy, including Rome and Milan, where audiences were the most discriminating. By 1725, his compositions, including his operas, were well known throughout Europe, and his music was more popular in Holland, like the Netherlands, France, and England than in Italy, and many Italians were uncomfortable with an ordained priest composing operas. Remember, he was supposed to only be doing church stuff, and now he was getting famous for this non-church stuff. In fact, in 1734, one of his operas was banned in Italy because he was a priest. Now, you may think to yourself, why is it such a big deal in Italy for a priest not to be composing operas, but in all these other countries it seems to be fine? Well, think about this. The other countries were mostly Protestant. They were Protestant churches, not Catholic churches. And in Protestant churches, pastors can be married, and it's not a big deal. But in the Catholic Church, it was a huge deal, and Italy is an extremely Catholic country, and it continues to be so today. That's why it was a big deal in Italy where he lived. Vivaldi traveled throughout Europe in the late 1730s and early 1740s and lived briefly in Holland, the Netherlands, where his music was very popular. Despite occasional disagreements with the church over his operas, Vivaldi remained as orchestral conductor at St. Mark's in Venice, which was in Italy. In 1741, when he was 63 years old, he moved to Vienna, Austria, hoping to receive an offer as a court musician or a composer. But he didn't receive any offers, and that is where he died, in Vienna, Austria. After his death, his music was rarely performed until the 20th century, when musicians and audiences rediscovered it. During his lifetime, he was known as an opera composer. But today, while his operas are again being performed, his orchestral works are the most popular. Vivaldi claimed to have written 94 operas, but music scholars have found the music or the scores for only 50 of those operas, so a lot of them were lost, or he was lying about how many he wrote in the first place. Antonio Vivaldi was a pleasant man with a full head of bright red hair. For this, he was sometimes referred to as the Red Priest. He was comfortable writing music for both religious and concert performances. So now you know why I had something to say about the white hair in the picture, because underneath that white wig was a shock of bright red hair. Now, there's a quote on here from another composer named Igor Stravinsky, who is quite popular in a much more recent time period, and he did not enjoy Vivaldi's music. He called Vivaldi a dull fellow who would compose the same music over and over. And unfortunately, Vivaldi has a little bit of a reputation for doing that, and Stravinsky's not the only person who thinks that to be true. All right, in the next video, we're going to talk a little bit more about just various little facts about Vivaldi's life and also about what was going on in the world during the time that Vivaldi was alive.